All right. Hello, everybody. Okay, we're going to get started. I know we have hopefully more people kind of come in the room as we kind of go through all this. But welcome back to the new school year. We are going to be talking about TeKSbank Classroom today, but this presentation is designed for returning users. So the assumption for this presentation is that you've been in TeKSbank Classroom for a minute. You kind of understand the basics of how to build things in TeKSbank Classroom, and then we're going to kind of talk about some of the more detailed things in TeKSbank Classroom and some of the settings that you may be able to go through. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump to your team. By the way, if you want to follow along today, that bit.ly up there will give you access to the presentation. You can follow along with us and we will uh, and we are recording this. So for those that maybe registered and couldn't join us today, you will get a recording of this presentation. Let's start off by talking about your team. Okay, so this is the team here at Region 10 in Data Solutions. We have Courtney Stevens, our assistant director. We have Christopher Gray, our program coordinator, who's online with us today. We have Bree Manuel, who is a consultant. We have Dr. Allison Smithwick, who is a consultant. And then you have myself, Joshua Dunn, who is a consultant on the team. You've probably reached out and heard from us before. We are your TeKSbank team. So whenever you have any questions about TeKSbank or TeKSbank Classroom, that will be sent directly to us. We are the ones that receive that feedback. We are the ones that go into the program and we fix or change anything that needs to be fixed that you give us. And so, yeah, so that's your team. So, and I say that's your team because we truly are. So, if you ever need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Here's our agenda today. We are number one going to prep for next year. So we're going to spend a really short little amount of time showing you how to archive your courses in TeKSbank Classroom so that it's all ready and fresh to go for the next school year. Then we're going to dive a little bit deeper into formative assessment. So we're going to spend some time on there and then kind of go into the differences between assessment and assignment, designing stronger checks, reading the data, playing for purpose, and then we'll wrap up with an exit ticket. So please stay on and provide us feedback because that's what we need. We need your feedback so we can only improve ourselves. All right. So before we get started, I have a little a little formative substance piece ourselves for you to kind of help guide us through our conversation today. So if you could, this should be open to everybody. If you go to that website right there or scan that QR code and punch in that code, we will hopefully see some results here on the screen. So I'll give everybody a minute or so to do that, and then we'll see what our results are. Okay, I know it takes a second to get in there, so it's all right. We're not in a hurry. But just let us know what you're currently spend most of your time in TeachSpank Classroom. It'll help frame our conversation today, as I was saying. Many users get comfortable with just creating and assigning, but the real value comes when we use the evidence to make the decisions. Okay, I see assigning for students, playing for reteach and extension. All right, sharing resources. All right, so we're going to talk about each of these pieces today in our presentation and go into a little bit more depth in each of these. But thank you for participating and joining in with this. And yeah, that's really helpful to see as we move through the presentation. All right, so to get us started, let's start prepping for next year. So I have on here a quick little video that you can follow along in the presentation if you're doing it. First, you'll go to your TeachSpank Classroom link. And then as it loads, you see all your classrooms up there at the top of your screen. So select the first one, first grade homeroom. So if you click on that and go into the classroom itself, just go over to settings. And as you can see right there, you see a button that says Archive Classroom. It'll give you a little warning. If you're ready to do that, it won't delete any data. It will just archive it. Once you hit confirm, It will take you back to your all your classrooms. As you can see, is no longer there on the top. So it's a really simple process, but it's an easy way to start the next year by archiving your old classrooms so that you don't have them moving forward, and then you can set up your new ones with your new classes as you move into the next school year. All right, see, I told you that was going to be quick. All right, so let's dive into the biggest part of this is formative assessment. So you hear us talk about it all the time just because we know the importance of formative assessment. And TeachBank Classroom is your source to do a really comprehensive formative assessment system. And we'll get into all that as we talk through this. But just know that formative assessment is essential to as you plan and you develop your instruction and where that should lead you and help your kids grow throughout the school year. So you may have seen this slide before. We know that TeacsBank is going to be the summative backbone for measuring mastery, and TeacsBank Classroom is going to be your formative engine that drives your daily decisions. So TeacsBank Classroom is the innovative formative assessment tool that uses the content from TeacsBank Classroom. We've talked about that before, about how it pulls all of our 85,000 items and it gives you the convenience of an LMS like a Google Classroom to be able to assign these to your kids and be able to get good feedback. And that feedback allows teachers to really make those instructional decisions and increase the student ownership of learning. So you've probably also seen this graphic before. Like we said, that TeachBank is going to be that backbone. It's going to have all those pieces that you need. Your DMS is going to be your Eduforias, your Edugences, your school cities, those places where the data warehouses are, where you go in and you can really get a robust and comprehensive view of all this. However, we also, again, promote with TeachBank Classroom the idea that empowers those classroom teachers to create those formative assessment pieces. So it helps target specific lesson objectives. It gives immediate feedback to the students. It gives you a visualization of the data in real time so that you can have those conversations with your kids. And it helps you kind of drill down and really get an idea of where your students are and how to build that. So we do practice that as a balanced assessment system. Most of us are familiar with formative assessment as short quizzes, essay tickets, or checks for understanding. But assessment itself is not what makes a process formative. What becomes formative is when we examine the evidence, adjust the instruction or student action, and then check again to see whether the learning has improved. This complete cycle, is where TeachBank Classroom becomes its most useful. So you can see our little graphic up there. You design it, you check it, you respond to it, and you check it again. So did it work? And how does that influence what might happen next in your classroom? So if you're doing this as warm-up ticket, are you going to take that data, turn around and utilize it in your instruction, spend a little bit more time, hit those things and reteach? Or are you using it as a tool to show whether students have got it or not? And if they do, are you going to move forward? Are you going to shorten your instructional cycle because the students already have it? So we know we don't have enough time in our classrooms. So are you going to use that time to move forward to a new concept and be able to utilize that time for that? So we transform the assessment culture through three tiers of direct support. Our foundation is cultivating assessment literacy by shifting the focus from testing for a grade to testing for growth. So this is one of the most important slides in our webinar. So when we really look at it, we try to make sure we take TeachBank Classroom and see how it naturally fits within the PLC cycle. So we've embedded those questions in this graphic so you can see. So you plan, what do we want students to learn? We move to build, how will we know if they learned it? And then to analyze, how will we respond when students do not learn it? And what will we do if they already do learn it? So this is a natural fit within the PLC cycle. And as your PLCs are discussing this, that will help drive your assessment conversations and help kind of mold which way they should go. So we know that when you look at this is our data dashboard that you get in TbC. So you can kind of see right now it is anonymous. So then there aren't any students' names on that. You can definitely click that to see the students' names. But this is how you really kind of figure out what you want to do. So when we talk about planning, so what idea do you want to do with the results? We don't know exactly what students will show us, but we should know the possible instructional pathways. So that's that building piece of it. If a student struggles, we may need a whole class clarification or reteach. If the students are mixed, sorry, let me put up my graphic. So if this uh, results are mixed, group students and address the shared misconceptions, but the students are ready, then extend, apply, or move forward. So if you're looking at this data screen and you're looking at the results up there, those for that question number one, that's where you're probably going to reteach the entire class because at 17%, it shows that students did not understand that concept. So you're really going to need some time to really reteach it and make sure that students understand it. However, on the other side of that, for questions 6, 7, 8, depending on what that standard is, you may want to group students. So 46%, 78%. So you have a little bit more where students understand it but don't understand it. So group those accordingly and be able to reteach those concepts in a smaller group. And then obviously for questions 3, 4, and 5, the entire class got 100% on those. So they get it. So what are you going to do next? How are you going to extend that learning, especially for those students that don't need to reiterate what you've already taught them? So do not wait until after the assessment to decide what the results mean. Plan for that in the beginning, and that's going to be your journey on the formative assessment piece. So digging a little bit deeper, when we get into TeKSbank Classroom, there are oftentimes, and I know I'm guilty of it too, when I'm looking at building things out. So in TeKSbank Classroom, they call it an assignment, but we often call it an assessment. So what's the difference between the two of them, right? So it's honestly, when you're really looking at it, you can use those terms interchangeably, and that's okay, but they actually represent two different sets of decisions. They ultimately work together, and it does get a little confusing. So please stay with me because we'll kind of dig into this in the next couple of slides. The assignment is the master copy. So those are the questions, the standards, the scoring, and the structure of it all. So when you're looking at the assessment, that's going to be, and I know I'm guilty of it too when I was a classroom teacher. So I like, okay, I'm going to pick these things and I'm done with it, right? However, the assignment piece is a student-facing version. So that's going to be the classroom, the settings, the access, the tools, and the feedback. So those are going to be kind of the more existential things that will have a role in deciding how you look at the data. When we build an assessment, we are deciding what evidence we need. When we create the assignment, we are deciding how students should experience it. And together, that is going to give us the data that we need to move forward. So as you can see, the assessment is where you build it. The assignment is how you deliver it, but they work hand in hand. So to go a little bit more in detail, so if you're looking at the evidence intended versus the evidence collected, the designing the evidence is what part of the standard am I checking? What should students be able to do? What items type should reveal the thinking? How much evidence is enough? So those are going to be your assessment decisions. So on the other side, your assignment decisions are when will the students complete it? Which tools should be available to them? What feedback will students receive? And will students have another opportunity to go back and master this? The two layers have to work together, but our goal is to create the conditions for students to accurately show what they understand, not simply put another assessment in front of them and then move on. These, like I was saying in the last slide, these do work hand in hand, even though it may be a little bit harder to kind of understand the differences between all that. So, for example, if we need students to explain their reasoning but only select simple recall answers, the assessment design is weak. But if we build a strong assessment, but put but choose settings that reveal answers too early, so that's that design piece of that, remove necessary tools or create access barriers, the assignment design can weaken the evidence. So we need them to work hand in hand so that they can do it together. The goal is not simply to deliver an assessment, is to create the conditions for students to show what they know. And ultimately, why in TeKSbank Classroom they are called assignments as opposed to just simply assessments. So hopefully that makes it a little clearer. Again, I know that's a very strong, strange concept. So, but they do have its place, especially when you're building comprehensive formative assessment design to understand all the pieces to that. So you're skilled in creating assessments and pushing out the assignments to your students. So let's talk about how to build stronger formative assessments with these in mind. So before we even open the item bank and begin searching, we need to know what instructional decisions we are trying to make. It's easy to begin with a number, 3 questions, 5 questions, or even 10 question quiz. but the number of questions do not determine the quality of the evidence that we're going to get. So start by asking what you actually need to know. So this is going to give you the specific understanding or skill that you need to check. Next, what should students be able to do? So we want to make sure that we understand whether they need to identify, interpret, compare, explain, or apply. Then we need to really dig into the misconceptions. What might go wrong with this? So anticipate that or the error pattern that you may receive, and that's going to help you get better data in the end. And then finally, and most importantly, what do you do with the result? So this is where you're going to clarify, group your students, reteach it, extend the instruction, or move forward based off your timing that you have in your class. When those questions are clear, the platform becomes much easier to use intentionally. You're no longer searching for any item aligned to the standard, because again, I know I'm guilty of that when I was a classroom teacher. We are searching for an item that gives us really the evidence that we need to know and be able to understand that data. Do not begin with how many questions do I need, but begin with what decisions do I need to make before you even begin to build your assessment. So this all leads to this, the idea that tasks students are asked to complete are really what we want to know about their learning. So different tasks reveal different kinds of thinking. So it is not intended to be a hierarchy where one verb is automatically more rigorous or more valuable than another. So if you've ever sat through a TEA presentation, they have their basket of fruit and they talk about the different levels of rigor that each question has, and they all equal out to a certain number. We're not here to do that today. We're just really here to like really dig into what each of these verbs are going to really kind of show us. The question is whether the task matches the expectation of the standard and gives us the evidence we can actually use. So for example, if I'm looking at identify, so we know identify is going to show us a recognition or recall. And then if we go a little bit deeper, I pulled a social studies standard here, so that has identify in it. Identify economic differences along the different regions. So because of that, in the social studies standard, students need to recognize how the economies of different regions varied. They might identify which region relied more heavily on agriculture, manufacturing, trade, or another form of an economic activity. The evidence tells us whether students can distinguish those regional economic characteristics. It does not necessarily tell us whether yet they can explain those differences developed or analyze their effects. So moving to the next one, if we look at interpret, we know that interpret is the understanding of a source, graph, or model. So if I pull up a math and algebra 1 standard, interpret the meaning of values of a and b in exponential functions of a form, fx equals abx, in real-world problems. So a student may be able to identify the values of a and b or substitute numbers into the function, but interpretation asks something different. What do those values mean in the real world situation? Students need to connect the symbiotic relationship or representation of to the context. Sorry, I'm not a math person. So making sure I understand what I'm trying to tell you guys. Recognizing A as an initial value and B as a growth or decay factor, the task makes it visible whether students understand the meaning behind mathematics, not merely whether they can recalculate. So I move over to analyze, examine relationships, patterns, causes, effects, and parts. So let's look at a science item this time from grade 7. Analyze the beneficial and harmful influences of human activity on groundwater and surface water watershed. A strong task might provide data, a model, a watershed diagram, or several human activities, and ask students to connect each activity to its effects. The evidence should reveal whether students understand the cause and effect relationships within the system. And then finally, explain. This is where you're looking at reasoning and misconceptions. So here's an English 1 example. Explain the purpose of rhetorical devices and the effect of logical fallacies. In this English standard, students must first identify the rhetorical device or logical fallacy, but it is not a complete explanation. They must explain why the author used the device or how the fallacy affects the argument or the reader. The explanation can reveal whether students truly understand the author's choice, but it also can make misconceptions visible. For example, a student may correctly identify a straw man argument, but misunderstand how it changes or weakens the original claim. These standards come from 4 different content areas, but the principle is consistent, right? Identify reveals whether students can recognize or distinguish. Interpret reveals whether students can determine meaning and context. Analyze reveals whether students can examine relationships, patterns, and effects. And explain reveals whether students can communicate how or why. The verb helps clarify the thinking of the standard expects, and the task determines whether the thinking will actually become visible in the student response. Once we kind of have that kind of thinking, we need students to demonstrate. We can then choose the item type where it can show it clearly. So again, this is building upon each other. So once you've done all that and identified the standard and the rigor and the verb, now choose what item type you need for that. So if you're looking for recognize, quick evidence of understanding, you might choose a select your response, online or inline choice, or a multi-select. So you're really asking whether students can identify or distinguish. If you're looking for organization, evidence of relationships, you may want to use a drag and drop, a match table grid, or a hot text. So where students can classify, sequence, or connect. If you're trying to represent evidence through a model or response, you may look at hotspots, text edit or entries, or equation editors. Can students demonstrate or represent? Or if you're looking to explain, these item types will be constructor response, extended written explanations where appropriate. So can students really explain what their thinkings are all about? So do not choose an item type just because it's different. I know I've built tests before, not really understanding the process of it all, but really just saying, oh, okay, well, I have, two multi-selects, I have a multi-part, I have a hot text, and I have a hotspot on my test, and I have multiple choice. So that's a good balance of what students will see on STAR. Well, that's not exactly the way that you should design your test. So, and understanding that really will help you see what thinking needs to be seen and be done in your classroom. So before you assign to the students, check the fit of it. So is it worth doing one quick last check? First, do the items really match the intended learning? So then look at the student task. Does the task require that kind of thinking that we need to see? Third, think about the evidence. Will the responses actually reveal understanding or misconceptions? And fourth, think about your next move. Can the results guide a specific instructional response? And if those four pieces fit, then the assessment is more than just a collection of aligned items, it is positioned to be very purposeful. So the collection of assigned items is not automatically a purposeful assignment. So just keep that in the back of your mind as you're developing your assessments. All right, so let's move on into reading the data. So now you've built your assessment, you've assigned it to your students. So how are you going to look at the data? So when an assignment closes, the percentage is usually the first thing we notice. That makes sense. It gives us a quick picture of our overall performance, but it's not yet explain the learning. So for this example, as you know, this is a screen that comes up with our students when they get finished with an assignment. So you can see 43%, it tells which items students got right, which ones they got wrong, they got partial credit for. It's in student-friendly language, all the things that you are aware of using TbC in your classroom. However, look beneath the score. So take the score out of it and then really kind of dig into what repeats. So I'm sorry, thinking where, I skipped a slide, sorry. Where did the thinking break down and what does the pattern suggest? So that's going to really kind of give you a much more understanding of how much the students understood and demonstrated. The response patterns begin to help us understand why. The most direct place to begin looking at these patterns is at the item level. So one item can reveal more than right or wrong. So when we looked at it last time, we said look beneath the percentage and look for the patterns. So first, look at what the item actually required the students to do, the task. Was it asking them to identify the interpret or apply or organize or explain? That matters as the task shapes the evidence that we receive. There we go. There we go. What thinking did the item require? Next, let's look at the response. So did the students make the same choice? Did their responses show a common partial understanding? Was there a consistent point where the thinking appeared to break down? And then finally, you can look at the possible meaning of it all. So perhaps students misunderstood the content, perhaps they misunderstood the source of the model, perhaps they understood part of the idea but could not transfer this into a particular context. The key word is possible. A missed item gives us a clue, but one item does not automatically prove that students have failed to learn the entire standard. It tells us where to investigate more carefully. The item view helps us understand one point of difficulty. The next question is whether that difficulty is isolated or whether a part or appears across a larger body of evidence for that standard. So then you can use the item mastery or the standards mastery screen. So we've talked about the screen before in the past. You can see how students had a larger view of the standard itself, how many times it was tested, and what data that could give you. So the standard letter review allows us to step back and ask whether that difficulty is an isolated event or whether it appears across a larger body of evidence. The percentage helps us locate the area that needs attention. So if we're kind of really looking at that, and so before acting on it, let's look at the standard that's represented. How much evidence contributes to that result, and whether that contributing evidence tells a consistent story. For example, the lower standard result may reflect several items showing some misunderstanding. That gives us stronger evidence of a learning need, but it could also reflect one particular difficult item or a very small amount of evidence. In that case, we need to return to the item before deciding the entire standard needs to be retaught. So the two views work together. Standard data helps us locate the need and consider patterns across students over time. Item evidence helps us understand what students may have misunderstood. And before we trust either the item pattern or the standard pattern, we also need to make sure that students have the evidence, or need to make sure that students' evidence has actually been scored. So this is a difficult item, or is it a pattern across the standard? So use the standard data to locate the need, use the item evidence to help understand it. So manual scoring also completes the evidence. So if you have a short constructed response, as you see up here, this is you going in and being able to grade it. But obviously, when you're looking at that, open responses require us to apply our professional judgment. Until those responses are scored, we may only be looking at part of the evidence. The purpose is not simply to enter a point value. Read the response against the item-specific rubric and look at what student understands. What is incomplete, and where should the reasoning begin to break down? A partial credit response can be especially useful. It may show that the student understands the concept but omitted one required component, used weak evidence, or struggled to communicate the full explanation. Scoring completes the numerical result, but the reading of the response gives us instructional value. Once the evidence has been scored, the next question is what the results actually mean. So going back to the score, when you see a low result, it's natural to begin forming an explanation. We may say that students did not master the standard, that they need more practice, or that the item was simply difficult. Any of those explanations could be true, but the score alone does not prove them. The next step is to treat the first explanation as a hypothesis. What did the students actually understand or misunderstand? And did the vocabulary, directions, graph, passage, or model interfere with its access? So did the task require students to interpret, analyze, or explain in a way that they were not prepared to do? We should ask whether the same issue applies to other items. If it does, then we have stronger evidence of a learning gap. If it does not, we may be dealing with one item, one context, or the one response format. The goal is not to delay action, is to make sure our actions addresses the actual problem. Once we have a defensible explanation of the pattern, we can move on from reading the data to planning that response. So those are all the different things that kind of go up when you ask those type of questions. As a result identifies where to look. The evidence underneath it helps explain why. So does the same issue appear in other items? So then that brings us to planning the response. We talked about the learning gap in just a sec, or we talked about the learning gap in the last couple of sections of slides. So let's really kind of dig into it. When we move into planning the response, the temptation is to move directly from result to an action. So we see the standard was low. We decide that students need more practice or we need to reteach it. And we've probably said these things in our PLCs before. The standard was low, they need more practice. However, we go from outcome data to targeted response without really kind of naming that learning gap. So what is missing between the result and the response? So we really need to be asking ourselves what was misunderstood, where did the thinking break down, and what misconception appeared. So those are the three questions that should really kind of define and understand what the learning gap actually is. So students can blank, but are still struggling too. So those are some things to think about as you're building out your assessment and the results that are given from that. If the learning gap is vague, the instructional response will be too broad, and it's going to be hard to like narrow down into what you really want the students to understand or come away with. So once we have named the learning gap, we're ready to choose a response, but that response has to fit the evidence. When we look at that, when we begin the pattern, when we begin with a pattern we observed, then we start breaking down specific learning gap. What was misunderstood and where did thinking break down? From there, we can choose the smallest instructional move to directly address that gap. The word smallest is intentional. Students may not need the entire standard to be retaught. They may need one distinction clarified, one model compared, or one process made visible, or one misconception addressed. Think of this as part of your when you think about your special ed students, right? So, and think about like least restricted environment, right? You're trying to find the smallest little piece to be able to identify and track and be able to fix before you move on to the next thing. And that's going to build on itself to be able to be better. So again, look at the evidence. What pattern did you see? Identify the learning gap. What exactly was misunderstood? Plan your next moves. What was the smallest response that fits? And then check your follow-up. What evidence showed that it worked so that you can replicate that as you move forward. The goal is not simply to act. The goal is to try a focused response, observe its impact, and adjust from there. Going back to our previous slide when we talked about check, respond, check again, that's where this kind of all comes full circle. The follow-up is most useful when students have received feedback that they can actually use before they try again, because if not, we're just shooting in the dark and we're giving students um, nothing to really hone in on or try to fix themselves, and they're as confused as we are as we move into our instructional pieces. So instructional action should be specific enough to try, observe, and to adjust. So if we're looking at this item right here, so I pulled a social studies item. I'm a social studies guy, so this is part of the reason why I did that. So here's a question from our TEKSbank. So this illustration shows British soldiers stationed in colonial towns during the 1700s. Which grievance listed in the Declaration of Independence is best illustrated in this image? So I can see the class response. So it's kind of all over the place. So A, 14%, B, 26%, C, 51%, D, 9%. So what does that tell me? So that's going to be a piece of it to get really dig into with our students and find a way to do it. But these are the questions I should really be asking. So if I'm looking at the question stem, what was the item asking us to do? If I'm looking at the questions or the answer choices, what made the common response tempting? And then looking at the stimulus or the piece that's in the question, the illustration, what evidence or strategy changes the answer? So these are all important things that you should be doing for every one of your items that you're pulling and putting on your assessment or assignments, or however you want to call it. As we said earlier, making sure that you're intentional about what you're looking at and the items that come through that. A class data talk can serve as feedback, a brief reteaching, or preparation for another opportunity to apply the learning. So if you're looking at that standard again, finding a different way of tackling it, that's going to be helpful. So so it's going to turn into a shared learning opportunity to move forward with that. Here's a math item. So same kind of thing. If I'm looking at, I'm sorry, a hotspot with a math item and they have to pick a certain point on a graph, you can see again, similarly, they have the same kind of layout of the results. So discuss the item, not the individual students to really kind of hone in on that and same kind of thing. So what was the item asking you to do? What made the common response tempting? And then what evidence or strategy changes that answer? Okay, so that was a lot. It was a very dense presentation. And so we are going to kind of dig into some of these throughout the school year and kind of come back to it as we hit these different points. But we want to kind of give you a broad overview of some of these other pieces of TeachSpan Classroom and how to utilize it in your classroom. So this next part, when we talk about resources, so you can always find our YouTube library by clicking on this link if you're following along with the presentation and dig into a little bit deeper and how to work on that. Here's our technical support. So if you ever have any questions, we talked about at the very beginning about how our team is the ones that they come to. So you can either send an email to datasolutions@region10.org or give us a call. Though all your comments and questions will come directly to us. We will be the ones responding back to you. And you can find some things about how can you do these things in your classroom, what kind of registration issues may be happening, or if you get an error message, what do you need to do for that? All right, so as we were talking about the very beginning, here's our slide with the QR code. So if don't mind giving us feedback, we love to hear it and how we can do better and how some other things that you may be looking forward to and throughout the school year. Again, we have these webinars pretty regularly. So if you would like to see something that we talked about today a little bit more in detail, we can break any of those pieces out to do a webinar on if that's what y'all want to do. So just let us know. We are here for you and to dig in a little bit deeper with any of this for you. All right, I'm gonna give you a second to scan that QR code to do that, and then we'll wrap this up. How are we doing on time? 20 minutes left. All right. Well, that's good to know. So I went through that presentation really quickly. So if you have any questions, we only have a few of y'all on here. So if you want to come off mute and ask us some questions or to go in a little bit more detail, we can definitely do that as well. So, but first, if you would do the survey. Real quick, as if you haven't been looking at the chat, we also have a couple of different things on there as well, so that you can see that. Mr. Gray has been really great about putting that information in there with the bit.ly to the presentation. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to jump off mute or to just put it in the chat. And let's wrap this up. I'll put the slide back up at the very end in case you need it. But just a couple of other little housekeeping things to kind of cover. We are doing a user group meeting. First for us, we're going to be doing that in September. So it's going to be September 28th in the morning from 8:30 to 11:30. We will have breakfast for everybody who would like to join. You can see the QR code and the bit.ly down there at the bottom if you would like to join. If you are far away and you can't make it here to Region 10, we will have that as a virtual option as well. Sorry, we can't provide breakfast that way. But if you would like to and still join and hear our conversations, please do. And so we hopefully will have, I mean, our plan is to have different people, different teachers and educators from multiple different districts come and talk about how they utilize TeachSbank Classroom in their districts. And maybe you can get some ideas from them and ask them some questions. We'll also have our platform people or people who do our background platform campfire to be there, and you can ask them questions as well. So if there's something you don't like and there's something that we can't fix, they're the ones to tell them about. So just know that that's an option for you if you would like to come and join us. And we also are trying to push out a new thing with text alerts. So if you would like to sign up for those text alerts, you can scan that QR code right there, and it will take you to a link to put your number in, and we'll send you text alerts whenever we have updates or changes to our system or any kind of other announcements that we want to push out. So this is just an added thing if you're already on our mailing list and you come to these webinars, just another way to get in contact with you. All right. And then last but not least, again, here's your team. So we are over TSpank and TSpank Classroom. There's our number, and you can follow us in any of those social media accounts as well if you would like to do that. And with that, that's the end of our presentation. Does anybody have anything they would like to come up and talk about? If not, y'all are free to go today. We will be sending out the recording of this here by the end of the day, if not tomorrow. So hopefully by the end of the day today. And yeah, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you taking time. I know this is a busy time of year coming back from to school. And so if you need anything from us, please reach out and let us know.